This week's lecture for Parsha Vayechi, I would like to dedicate for those people who suffer after abuse they went through, uh, or people who suffer from narcissistic relationships or effect from that, and as well to dedicate this to end up the war and make peace in Israel, unity within Israel, and the coming of Mashiach. So let's start. After making teshuvah, for me, one of the most difficult things was realization that my every single thought is known to God. For those who don't know, teshuvah is repentance. This was as well the biggest confrontation for me, and it remains still today a challenge for me to keep my thought flow remarkably under control. This is obvious, and I think I'm not unique in this challenge. Of course, as well, the confrontation with my deeds toward my fellows, human beings, and my friends or unknown people, as well, was very challenging. But this process was different. Why? Because all my life I tried to move on forward, and some deeds were done while I was on a completely different stage in my life, as well as on a different mental stage. I won't be able to do something like that now. Things like what I've done, let's say, 20, 25 years ago. It was repentance for the past sins. I didn't have to make any effort to don't do such a thing now. I only had to deal with regret. For some things, regret was and is mixed with ongoing, underlying pain and shame. But still, I don't have to make effort to don't sin, at least when it comes to my level of observance. But when it comes to my inner world, my thoughts, this is where I feel how hard it might be to keep your thought flow on the level where I wouldn't allow any destruction to disturb me and my faith to God, to have complete reliance on God, whatever happens. Bitachon, or reliance on God, is like a muscle which can be trained, our sages say. And in my point of view, bitachon and reliance on God comes with experience, often dark experience, when time after time you realize that this darkness is temporary and everything is going to be fine and becomes fine. That realization that you were worrying in vain. And then again and again and once more time. So step by step, you learn to believe in a positive outcome. This is my experience. I'm sharing with you how I gained trust in God. Joseph is one of the best examples of how we should never lose our trust in God. Of course, not every one of us is meant to achieve what Joseph had achieved. However, every one of us is climbing their own invisible mountain and had failures and victories on different levels and scales, visible and not visible for the human eyes. Every one of us have been in a kind of pit where one and every one of us somehow got out of there. Doesn't matter to be a physical pit or that happens mostly emotional one. Isn't it right? In our teenage years, when insecurities, inner insecurities are on the highest, I believe we deal with feeling of being in the pit most often, at least as much as I remember myself. We don't have yet experience to be compared with. We don't have, we don't really know who we are and what is our potential. Betrayals at that age are felt intensively, just like all other emotions. Only other emotions, not living scars. These scars help us to build the walls around us and putting masks on our faces, creating distortion in our personalities. When betrayal is coming from close people, it's even worse, I believe. In fact, strangers can't really harm us, emotionally at least, isn't it? When betrayal is happening within close family, is often even hard to detect. Well, Joseph was a teenager, but I think he was aware of what happened to him. He appeared to be the only Torah personage who had cried so much and so often. For as much as he was hurt by his own brothers, for as much he had strength within and trust in God to forgive them. He had much more bitachon and purity of his heart than his brothers, who after death of their father said to Joseph that his last wish, their father's last wish, was that his children would live in peace and that Joseph wouldn't take a revenge on them. Probably it was unbelievable to them that he could forgive them. They really thought, I'm taking conclusion out of this robe, that they really thought that he will take revenge on them. They were afraid. Not only the strength to endure all the trials that life sent him, but the gift of forgiveness was that made him great. Let's leave Joseph and his story for a minute. Most of us carry the traumas, small or major. I myself can only speak about my own experiences, because despite the fact that we often hear from others, oh yes, I understand you. No, people don't really understand you. They don't really know what's going on within of you, because people can only try to understand, and that would be the correct answer if they would say, I can try to understand you, or I have compassion to you, or it must be hard to you. But don't say I understand you, because no one ever has been in your shoes, in the shoes of that person who is going through something major or significant, or person who is in the pit, because every pit is different. And still, out of my experience, I can tell you, if your trauma is related to the deeds of other people toward you, and It is not even pain of gained trauma that is bothering you. It is disappointment of betrayal and inability to forgive that bother the most and drags down, especially if it comes from people that you're supposed to trust. For me, this process of forgiveness and giving a place to what happened to me took decennia. Of course, it's easier said than done, even if it's true that by holding on such a thing, on such a pain, you only hurt yourself, not the person it is addressed to, not the person you address that hatred or painful emotions and memories to. They feel nothing. This feeling that you carry inside of you might be so intense that it can define your whole life. It is truly the gift from above to be able to let go. At the moment when I did Teshuvah for the first time, I tried to bring up all my known sins and asked forgiveness even to people whom I for years hated in my heart. I forgave many people as well. In following years, during the time of repentance, I was asking myself a question which went deep, and somehow it touches the story of Joseph and his brothers as well. And that is, Joseph himself admitted that he in fact went to Egypt before his family in order to ensure their survival. I wasn't sold, I was sent. The famous words of Joseph, where he means that it was really his mission. Actually, God sent him to Egypt in order and to ensure the survival of his family, which actually was the beginning of exile of Jewish nation to Egypt. If so, if he was really sent to Egypt and not sold as a slave by his brothers, so what about his brothers then? Did they really sold him? Did they really sin? Or they were just an instrument in God's hand in order to ensure the mission of Joseph going down to Egypt being possible? Do they really sin in front of Joseph? Well, for him it felt like this for sure, I'm sure, even if he is on such a high level to being able to say that he wasn't sold and was able to forgive them. However, paradox is that despite the pain they caused him, he really saw the situation as a godly mission. And again, let's leave Joseph for a minute and look at our worldly matters, at people, and how we sort them out. Most of the time, people stand out or feel important somehow to themselves and to others through either their material gain and successes, or intellectual gain and successes, or experiential experiences. Often these things are combined. We tend to look up to this kind of people. Another factor, it is the amount of hardships person went through. We most of the time look up to someone who went through significant trouble. Someone who got out of the pit. This serves for some as inspiration and motivation, like a stairs to get out of their own pit and pain. For others, it is just fulfilling the boring, meaningless lives with something sensational. Joseph had complete package in all those things. It was not only the betrayal of his brothers, it was him becoming a slave. It was him spending 13 years of his life in prison, not seeing his father and mother and not knowing their destiny. In fact, In fact, by the miracle and the ease achieving the top and saving his family, but yet remaining stranger in Egypt, who maintained his own identity and was able to get a short leave to bury his father, and probably being grateful for the life he was able to achieve thanks to God. This biggest achievement was his ability. His biggest achievement was his ability to deal with his emotion after the hardships he went through. His biggest achievement was getting out of the pit, time again and again. As famous quote saying, it's not about how many times you fell, it's about how many times you stood up and went further. We all can learn from his example. He relied on God completely, not only because he didn't trust human beings anymore, and not because there were no people around him, because this was the only right thing to do. Because he was the son of Jacob, who taught him these values. So every one of us, even if you hadn't parents who could teach you high morals and Torah way of life, you too could get out of the pit by learning to forgive from Joseph and by improving your values through Torah, by letting go of your past through repentance. In this week's Torah portion, we learn about 12 tribes of Israel receiving the blessings from their father before his death. Every one of them got different purpose and direction in life, defined through the history and ages. Jacob appointed Yehuda as a leader, even though his son Reuben was firstborn and should be entitled to this. Why is that? Not only because there were some family disputes and Reuben done the things he didn't supposed to do. And Shimon and Levi too, who were born after Reuben, they too were known for their temper, so to say. Yehuda himself was not the best example. He wanted to kill Joseph out of jealousy and sold him as a slave. So how could Jacob make such a distinction and decision and trust leadership in hands of Yehuda? Two factors played role there. One factor was that Yehuda didn't strive to get there. Yehuda didn't strive for leadership. Not many people realize what kind of responsibility it takes to be entitled to such a position, and what kind of self-sacrifice it takes. When you realize that, you won't be rushing up there. Second factor was repentance of Yehuda, and the way he stood up for Benjamin. He, in fact, stood up in front of almost ready to fight, even though the powers were not equal at all. And he didn't knew that he stood up in front of Joseph, his brother. He thought he stood up in front of Egyptian viceroy, protecting his younger brother, a Jewish boy, a Jewish child. The Midrash relates that Judah, as he approached Joseph, was ready for all eventualities. He was even prepared to go to war. This seems amazing. How could Judah feel justified in risking an almost suicidal combat when he and his brothers were a mere handful and Joseph commanded all Egypt? To be sure, Judah was exceptionally strong. Nevertheless, Joseph and his sons were similarly strong. When Judah and his brothers had stamped their feet in an attempt to frighten Joseph, all Egypt had trembled. And Joseph had promptly displayed similar powers, causing Judah to exclaim. The reason for Judah's fierce determination, even for self-sacrifice, was that he had personally undertaken the responsibility for Benjamin. Although his father had 11 children, he was prepared to endanger his life for even one Jewish child. This episode contains a clear message and guide to every mother and father. It is they who have been entrusted by God to carry the personal responsibility for each of their children. It is they who must therefore be prepared to go to any length of self-sacrifice for even one child, to ensure that he or she receives a pure and 100% Jewish education, so that nothing that unbefitting for a Jewish child should befall them. He should never, God forbid, become lost for Judaism. I love this comparison very much because this is actually, we as parents should stand in this situation for our children. However, there is always perspective of a child and a parent, because one moment you are a child, another moment you are a parent. And very often those things that we have to forgive are related to our parents, because many children, including myself, had something they were sad about, with some kind of pit that they couldn't forget to their parents they were put in because they didn't get something from them or get something of something too much of. So this point is very important to understand also, that when we become from that angry and disappointed child in maybe somehow lost to faith and lost in the world and being in the pit, the ability to understand and to become aware of yourself when you will become a parent. This is very important in order to not repeat the mistakes that our parents willingly or unwillingly repeated. However, Yehuda back then, when he stood up for that Jewish boy, for his own brother Benjamin, in front of Joseph, who he didn't even knew was his brother, he did it not knowing that he was tested, because back then he with ease sold Joseph to slavery, or maybe was just an instrument of God. Maybe Yehuda was then just an instrument of God in sending Joseph on a mission where he would discover his real potential and where his dreams will become true. We never know how any particular situation will work out. We don't know what God's plan is. We don't know why other people hurt us. We might never find out. But there is for sure meaning to our suffering. And for sure your life will be much easier if you will learn how to forgive and see things from a different perspective and trust. that everything is a God's plan.